Former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin admits that she has not received the COVID-19 vaccine. That's very interesting. But the reason that she hasn't, she claims, is because of science. So she said that recently on Gutfeld and argued that she is smarter than the scientists and actually is following the science by rejecting taking the vaccine. Here's her explaining why.
Oh, I am one of those white common sense conservatives. I believe in science, and I have not taken the shot. One, because the waitress never came back to ask me if I was ready for that shot. But two, because I do believe in science, and the Fauci-ism of the day back then was if you had COVID, I've had COVID, well, then Mother Nature was creating an immunity. And even today, they say, you know, you're 27% more immune.
27 times.
Yeah, 27 times.
It's huge.
Yeah. So I want to ask the questions. And yeah, if he's going to clobber me for that, well, then I take it back that he wasn't very nice to me.
Yeah, and by the way, you're absolutely right about natural immunity. It's probably the strongest immunity you have.
No, I believe in science. Debatable. Press X to doubt. So, all right. So now, Dr. Drew, oh my God, Dr. Drew pisses me off. There's nothing that pisses me off more than someone like Dr. Drew, okay? Remember, Dr. Drew was the guy who originally in the start of the pandemic was like, oh, no, there's no reason to mask up, it's fine. And then had to come out later and said, oh, oops, I was wrong. So why are we listening to Dr. Drew? All right? But the reason that I'm talking about him and not just Palin is because he backs this up and says, oh, yeah, the Israel study. All right, so let's get into the Israel study, okay? Now, if you're claiming, Gutfeld says this at the end, well, natural immunity is better. Well, so far, there are studies that suggest that that is the case. And so let me go through some of the details. Israeli researchers recently looked at thousands of medical records, and in one part of their study compared over 16,000 patients who were previously infected and never vaccinated against another 16,000 who had only received the Pfizer vaccine. They factored in age, gender, health, and when they were infected, were vaccinated. Now, they found, interestingly enough, that the vaccinated group did not report any prior infection, was much more at risk of catching COVID-19 later than on those who had previously been infected but not vaccinated. They found a 13-fold higher risk of breakthrough infection compared to reinfection. Now, that's interesting. So again, this is an August 25th study that came out of Israel and concluded that the study demonstrated that natural immunity confers longer lasting and stronger protection against infection. So now, there are some points here to remember. For one, this study was released immediately. It has not been peer reviewed. It still needs to be peer reviewed, but even so, hold on, before I get to that. Researchers also might have missed a number of asymptomatic infections because those people would have less reason to be tested. And that's, of course, one of the reasons why this study, again, you need to look at it a little bit closer and do peer review and things like that. So now, there was also no control for social distancing and mask wearing habits that would have affected the risk of infection. Not only that, but there is an inherent weakness in doing these retrospective analysis compared to with a prospective study that regularly tests all participants as it tracked new infections, symptomatic infections, hospitalizations, and deaths going forward in time. So these are important things the study kind of leaves out and are very important about getting a clear picture and how effective natural immunity is. So now, Natalie Dean, a biostatistician at Emory University, says in the study, quote, the biggest limitation is that testing for SARS-CoV-2 infection is still voluntary. It's not part of the study design. Comparisons could be confounded if, for example, previously infected people who developed mild symptoms were less likely to get tested than vaccinated people, perhaps because they believed that they were immune. So now that said, there are some positive aspects of the study that another study also pointed out, and this is from Rockefeller University. And they say, well, some of the stuff in the Israeli study were also seen. So now, the researchers didn't look at the antibodies themselves, but actually things called memory B cells. So now, memory B cells. So, okay, the way that the vaccine works is that you get the vaccine, right? And and it gives you antibodies, right? Your antibodies fight off the spike protein, and therefore, this is very super, super like simple, how it kind of works. The immunity given by the vaccine, the antibodies given by created by your body through the vaccine, fight off the infection, the spike protein, etc., and then they start to fade away. Okay, so now after the initial antibody response fades, the memory B cells hold on to the blueprint of the virus so that later on they can create antibodies. So if they see COVID-19 in the body later on, they can create those stronger antibodies in order to take on and destroy the virus. So now the Rockefeller team found that the memory B cells produced through natural infection ended up being more robust than those conferred by the vaccine. And they actually also evolve over the months, while the vaccination-driven memory B cells stopped changing after about 2 months. So that's interesting. And so when you look at the problem of variants, right? Well, when it comes to the variants, things like Delta and Mu and all that, they found that the naturally occurring memory B cells actually delivered better protection, which is why right now, as a result of the Delta variant, the efficacy of the vaccine has been slightly reduced. So now, because the vaccine was originally developed for the original strain, even though the vaccine is still very, very effective in working against the Delta variant. So that means it's still incredibly important to get vaccinated, especially if you want to prevent more variants. Because again, what this is about, this mass vaccination push and the push for mass mandates, is really about trying to keep people out of the hospital system. And why is that? Well, I mean, I guess there's several different reasons. For one, of course, you don't want people clogging up the hospital, or, and preventing other people from going in and being able to, get treatment. There are people that are being turned away at several hospitals, rationing of care. Oh my God, rationing of care. The thing that they warned us would happen under socialism is actually happening under capitalism. Weird. And it's a result of the same kind of people who hate socialism, ironically, that decide to not take the vaccine and clog up the hospitals. Again, you already know all the stats about how many people who are unvaccinated that are in the hospital and that are dying compared to vaccinated people. So I don't have to go through that. All right. But that said, right, you want to keep people out of the hospital system, get your vaccine. That's it. And of course, you want to eventually reach where you have a herd immunity and really shut down new variants of the virus, get your COVID-19 vaccine. There it is, right? So now, again, the Israeli research, I have to remind you, while promising, is preliminary, and it actually might change as we learn more. Now, the other problem, the big problem with natural immunity, I should say, is that you only get natural immunity if you've gotten COVID, which for 650,000 plus Americans and 4 million people across the world hasn't turned out very well. Their first encounter with the virus was deadly. And so it is much, much better to get your vaccine than it is to not get your vaccine. You know what I'm saying? And so now, again, science is an ongoing process of asking questions, right? So if you were wondering, like Sarah Palin, well, I already had COVID. Why do I need to have a vaccine? I have natural immunity. Or like Rand Paul, for example. Oh, I got natural immunity now. Well, again, natural immunity is actually far from perfect, just like vaccinations. Now, it's clearly, of course, better than not being vaccinated. But the way that you get that natural immunity, as I mentioned, could be fatal. You could end up with long COVID. You could end up with neurological issues. So, of course, obviously being vaccinated is better, smarter, And if you've already had COVID, again, your natural immunity, if you add in at least one dose of the Pfizer shot, apparently that immunity is even superior to natural immunity and getting both COVID shots. Now, of course, the CDC recommends that you get both COVID shots anyway, even if you've already had COVID before. And so we'll go with the CDC recommendations. You know why? Because it's better to be safe. It's better to be safe than sorry. And that's it. That's it. So now, there's more here. Eric Topol, a physician scientist at Scripps Research, said this, quote, about the Israeli study. We continue to underestimate the importance of natural infection immunity, especially when infection is recent. When you bolster that with at least one dose of the vaccine, you take it to levels that you can't possibly match with any vaccine in the world right now. But again, I'm going to say this. The best protection against COVID is to not get COVID at all. That's it. Get both shots of the vaccine. And if you're in areas of a high transmission, you wear masks and you socially distance. That's it. You follow the CDC guidelines. All right? And by the way, the CDC also points to a study that shows that unvaccinated people who have had COVID are twice as likely as vaccinated people to get COVID again. So that kind of goes against the Israeli study. So understand, if you're wondering then, with all of this, because I just threw a lot of information at you, if you're wondering though, should you get vaccinated after getting COVID? The answer right now, according to the science, and if you believe in it, believe in the science, if you're, say you're a common sense conservative like Sarah Palin, then you should absolutely get the vaccine. The answer is a resounding yes. Because why not have the most protection that you can get? It's just common sense. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.